Rabbi Davidson read a phrase in this week's Torah portion that is well known throughout the world to secularists and people of all faiths. It's often repeated in the gendered translation, "Man does not live by bread alone." This adage is used to assert that as humans, we crave sustenance beyond the physical. We need to be nourished spiritually, emotionally, mentally, aesthetically, intellectually, for our lives to have meaning. And that makes perfect sense. As created and creative creatures, we require more than what it takes to simply survive. We are driven to live fully and widely, to explore and experience, and to always be growing. But this is not the literal meaning of the phrase when it's read in context. Listen again to the verse in its entirety. Moses says to the Israelites, "God subjected you to the hardship of hunger and then gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your ancestors had ever known, in order to teach you that a human being does not live on bread alone, but that one may live on anything that God decrees." Taken in its original context, this phrase is not saying that we need more than bread to live. In fact, Moses' point is that we were able to do without bread entirely and still survive. After fleeing Egypt and depleting our matzah supply, God allowed us to feel the pangs of true hunger, then sent a strange, unfamiliar food down from the heavens, a flaky grain that coated the earth every morning. It didn't appeal to the senses or appear particularly satisfying, but that manna fell daily and sustained us through our 40-year trek throughout the wilderness. This verse insists that we are more adaptable than we might believe. When we don't have what we think we need, we can adjust to something else, even something that at first might be appealing or even distasteful. It's an important reminder. For many, if not for most of us, change is not easy. Right now, I'm in the process of accepting that Emanu-El staff uses Outlook. And still, every morning when I turn on my computer, I continue to senselessly hope that Gmail will magically appear. And someone on our clergy staff, who will go unnamed, doesn't carry an Android or an iPhone, but still uses a BlackBerry. The Torah cleverly uses the metaphor of food to drive home this point that change is always possible, because changing food habits is a common, deeply visceral challenge. Don't we all have food aversions or idiosyncrasies that we just accept as fact? For example, latkes, one of my favorite foods, as long as they come with a hearty side of applesauce. Put a dollop of sour cream on my plate and I cannot touch it. This is not only true for us as individuals, but as communities and nations. Consider the gefilte fish divide from a few generations ago, an invisible line separating sweet from savory, running from north to south throughout Central Europe. West of the line was Galicia, now southern Poland, where sugar beets grew and Jews ran several sugar factories. There, Jews liked gefilte fish sweet. East of the line, where sugar beets were a scarcity, the Lithuanian, Latvian, and Russian Jews seasoned gefilte fish with pepper. One Jew's disgust was another Jew's delight. Now, sometimes we can tolerate and even embrace each other's food preferences. You like vanilla ice cream and I like chocolate, so we make room in the freezer for both. But too often, we associate people's preferences with their character, and this impacts how we relate to each other. To Galician Jews, the analytical, unemotional Litvaks were rigid people whose spirit, like their food, lacked true Yiddisher ta'am, Jewish soul. To Litvaks, the Galitziner Jews were frivolous and silly, just like sugar. Their behavior, dancing around and singing nonsensical melodies, was a mockery to proper Judaism. We probably don't realize how often we carry judgment about other people's food and style of eating, and how that holds us back from a wider appreciation of life and a stronger connection to each other. When I visited my daughter who was living in India, and I was treated to a feast at the home of her host family, we sat on the floor and ate without utensils. I dipped naan into bowls of food and spices I couldn't discern. Not all were appealing, but I pushed myself to receive the gifts offered to me. Some dishes were strange on my tongue, many were delicious. The entire experience was flavored with graciousness and generosity, and I was able to truly live what we all know is a fact, that when you gather around food together, you form strong lines of connection and bonds. There are foods that we couldn't imagine eating, which frequent other people's menus. Fermented shark and smoked sheep's head in Iceland, moth larvae in Australia, horse meat in France. But before we wrinkle our noses at chicken feet hanging in the windows of Chinatown markets, let's think about the impact that a jar of gefilte fish might have on someone encountering it for the first or even for the 50th time. And it's important for we who are Ashkenazic Jews to remember that when we categorize foods as Jewish, we often overlook Mizrahi and Sephardic Jewish cuisines. One Jew's spice Moroccan harira soup is another Jew's chicken noodle. We forget or neglect how important it is for us to be open to what is new, unfamiliar, foreign. But think about how parents introduce new food to babies. We don't give up if they push away the spoon, or even if they spit something out for the first or fifth or 10th times. And as our children grow, we urge them to taste unfamiliar foods. Yes, we would like them to expand their palate, but it's for a deeper reason. We are teaching them the importance of opening themselves to growth and change. We want them to live with fullness and partake of all that the world has to offer. Moving something from the category of yuck to yum isn't easy, but change is always possible. I'm sure we can all reflect ourselves on foods that we couldn't stand at one time and that now we enjoy. And it is true also in a larger sense. At one time in this country, not too long ago, raw fish was considered inedible. But in 1966, a Japanese man named Noritoshi Kanai and his Jewish business partner, Harry Wolf, opened Kawafuku restaurant in Los Angeles. Now, maybe Harry believed in its success because the texture of sushi was similar enough to that of lox, who knows? But the point is that the sushi bar became successful. First, they geared it toward Japanese businessmen, who then would bring their American colleagues, and then they catered to celebrities in Hollywood, and from there, it was a pretty quick road to popularity. Today, sushi restaurants are in cities and states all throughout America. Rules about what is edible and what is not are not straightforward or logical. They may be a result of ingrained religious practice, cultural norms, elitist influence, economics, or availability. Swedish theologian Dr. Christer Stendahl once pointed out that the general understanding of the phrase, as most people know it, man does not live by bread alone, means something quite different when you quote it to a group of people who are wealthy than it does when you quote it to a group of people who are hungry. It's important for us to question our food judgments and aversions, to examine them for bias or privilege that we might be holding and not even recognize. The Midrash teaches that once we ate the manna, we discovered that it tasted like whatever we craved in that moment. We're taught that the young men ate it as bread. To the elderly, it tasted like wafers. To infants, it tasted like milk from their mother's breasts. To the sick, it was like fine flour mingled with honey. The sages who created this midrash recognized that our sense of taste changes with time and experience. And I also hear in this midrash a teaching that goes beyond our palates. Age and experience changes us. We can embrace change or we can resist it, but we cannot avoid it. Think about the timing of this teaching in the Torah. Moses is about to die, and we, the Israelites, are about to experience a radical transition without him. It's somewhat similar to when we crossed from Egypt into the Sinai desert, only then he was guiding us and pushing us. And also, now instead of stepping into a barren wilderness, we are going to be entering a rich land, flowing with milk and honey, abundant with barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, and more. All of this will be new and strange, and likely unappealing to the generation born in the desert, who only knew manna and water. So Moses reminds us to be open. He is encouraging us to stretch our palates and our spirits, to be open to new tastes and smells, textures and challenges, opportunities. He is urging us to reflect on our past and use that information so that we might grow, so that we can develop a practice of becoming more fully realized versions of ourselves. He is reminding us that when we think change is unnecessary or impossible, that is the time to question our assumptions. We hear Moses' call today as we stand on the precipice of a spiritual transition, poised to enter Elul, the month of preparation before the high holidays. The Kabbalah, the book of Jewish mysticism, teaches that when the Israelites eat manna from heaven, they grow in understanding of divine wisdom. As they digest its substance, their hearts and spirits absorb secrets of Torah. Their lips become a gateway for a deeper, more intimate connection with God. This is the very season when we must pay careful attention to our resistance to change. We are reflecting upon when we have held judgment, how we have cut ourselves off from God's array of offerings, and where we have created lines of division instead of forging pathways of connection. So let's take this teaching with us into Elul as an invitation to pay attention. When we experience a sudden or strong resistance to foods, to smells, to experiences, to ideas, to people, even to new technology. Let's respond to that impulse with curiosity and courage. Let's learn more about ourselves and have faith in our ability to change. Let's push ourselves to eat the manna, to take in the fullness of God's offerings. When we do, we are likely to more strongly feel God's presence within us and to become more fulfilled versions of who we are created to become. Amen.